The dust-laden wind whipped across the empty trail as Fiona Nelson's pale fingers clawed at the parched earth. Her wedding dress, once pristine white, now a tattered shroud of dirt and desperation. Her lips, cracked from dehydration, parted in a silent prayer as consciousness began to slip away beneath the merciless June sun of 1876. Kansas Territory had never seemed so vast and unforgiving as it did in that moment. 3 days without proper food or water had taken their toll. The stagecoach robbery that had left her stranded was now just a hazy memory compared to the immediacy of her suffering. Her wedding journey to meet her mail-order groom in Dodge City had ended here, miles from civilization, with nothing but her dwindling strength and fading hope. Fiona's vision blurred as a silhouette appeared on the horizon. A rider, perhaps death taking physical form to claim her. She couldn't muster the energy to care anymore. Her head dropped to the dirt as darkness claimed her. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments. The rhythmic sway of movement, strong arms cradling her. The scent of leather and pine, a heartbeat that wasn't her own. "Stay with me," a deep voice murmured, though Fiona couldn't tell if it was meant for her or the horse beneath them. She managed to open her eyes just enough to glimpse a strong jawline beneath the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat before fatigue pulled her back under. The next time she woke, it was to the sound of a door closing. She lay on something soft abed in a small, tidy cabin. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across rough-hewn walls. A man stood with his back to her, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "Water," she croaked, her voice barely audible. He turned, and Fiona saw her rescuer clearly for the first time. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His dark hair, somewhat long, was tied back at the nape of his neck. Without a word, he crossed to a table, poured water from a pitcher into a tin cup, and brought it to her. His movements were measured, deliberate. "Small sips," he instructed, his voice low and steady as he helped her lift her head. The water was cool, tasting sweeter than anything she'd ever known. When she'd had enough, he eased her head back onto the pillow. "Thank you," Fiona whispered. He nodded once, then moved to the fireplace. "You've been unconscious for hours, found you collapsed on the Cimarron Trail. I'm Fiona Nelson." Her voice sounded foreign to her own ears. "Kenan Northrup," he replied, not looking up from the pot he was stirring over the fire. "Most folks around here just call me North." "Where am I, Mr. Northrup?" "My homestead, about 15 miles southwest of Dodge City." He ladled something from the pot into a bowl. "You're safe now." Safe, the word echoed in her mind as she took in her surroundings more carefully. The cabin was modest but well kept. A rifle hung above the door. Books were stacked neatly on a small shelf. He returned to her side, bowl in hand. "Broth. Need to get something in your stomach. Been starving from the looks of it." Fiona tried to sit up, but weakness made her limbs uncooperative. Without comment, Kenan slipped an arm behind her shoulders and helped her into a sitting position, then pressed the bowl into her trembling hands. "Slowly," he cautioned as she brought the spoon to her lips. The broth was simple, just beef, vegetables, and herbs, but it filled her with warmth and strength. As she ate, she felt his eyes on her, assessing. "The stagecoach," she began, memories flooding back. "3 men with bandanas. They took everything: money, food, water, left me and the driver. He was hurt badly, told me to follow the trail, that I'd reach Dodge City." Her voice caught. "But I got lost, I think. Days wandering." Kenan's jaw tightened. "Dalton gang, most likely, been hitting stages all through the territory." He took the empty bowl from her hands. "The driver." Fiona looked down at her tattered dress. "He died the first night. I said words over him, then kept walking." A moment of silence passed between them, heavy with the understanding of how close she had come to the same fate. "You said Dodge City was your destination?" he asked finally. She nodded, sudden embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "I was to be married. A man named Harris Fletcher arranged for me to come from St. Louis. I answered his advertisement for a bride." Something flickered across Kenan's face, surprise, perhaps, or disapproval. "Fletcher, the banker." Yes. Do you know him? Kenan stood, taking the bowl to a wash basin. Know of him. Dodge City's not that big. His back was to her now. He'll be wondering where you are. Reality crashed over Fiona like ice water. Here she was in a stranger's cabin, her wedding day long past. What day is it? Tuesday, June 14th. I was due to arrive last Friday, 3 days late for her own wedding, to a man she'd never met. I need to get to town, explain what happened. Not tonight, you're 2 weeks still. His tone brooked no argument. Tomorrow, if you're stronger, I'll take you in. But Fletcher can wait another day. Kenan's voice was firm. You nearly died out there, Miss Nelson. She knew he was right. Her body felt as though it was made of lead, and even the small exertion of eating had exhausted her. Where will you sleep? She asked, noting the cabin had just the one bed. Got a bedroll, used to sleeping rough. He grabbed a blanket from a chest. Get some rest. Morning comes early out here. Fiona watched as he spread his bedroll near the fire, his movements economical. Despite her predicament, she felt oddly safe in this stranger's home. Perhaps it was the straightforward way he spoke, or how gently he'd tended to her despite his gruff exterior. Thank you, she said softly, for saving my life. Kenan paused, then nodded once without looking at her. Anyone would have done the same. But as sleep claimed her once more, Fiona wasn't so sure that was true. Morning brought a startling clarity. Sunlight streamed through the cabin's single window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Fiona awoke to find herself alone, the bedroll by the fire already packed away. She sat up, pleased to discover her strength somewhat returned, though her body ached in ways she'd never experienced. The door opened, and Kenan entered carrying an armful of firewood. He stopped short upon seeing her awake. Morning, he said simply, moving to stack the wood beside the hearth. Good morning. Fiona's hands went instinctively to her hair, which she knew must be a tangled mess. Her dress was beyond salvation, torn and stained beyond recognition. I must look a fright. Kenan's eyes swept over her briefly. Got some clothes might fit you. My sister left some things last time she visited. He crossed to a trunk, opened it, and pulled out a simple blue dress and undergarments, not fancy but clean. He placed them at the foot of the bed, then straightened. I'll wait outside while you change. Call if you need anything. Before she could thank him, he was gone, the door closing behind him. Fiona stared at the clothes, overwhelmed by the simple kindness. She hadn't expected to find such consideration in the rough frontier. Changing proved more difficult than anticipated. Her limbs still felt heavy, and the buttons challenged her trembling fingers, but eventually she managed. The dress was a bit large, but infinitely better than her ruined wedding gown, which she folded and set aside with a pang of regret. Mr. Northrup, she called once decent. I'm finished. He returned carrying a bucket of water and a small looking glass, which he set on the table. Thought you might want to wash up. From his pocket, he produced a simple wooden comb. Not much, but it's what I have. Fiona accepted the comb gratefully. You're very thoughtful. A hint of color touched his cheeks as he shrugged. Coffee's brewing outside, take your time. Once alone, Fiona used the water and a cloth to wash away days of dirt and tears. The face that greeted her in the looking glass was thinner than she remembered, her blue eyes huge against her pale skin. She worked the comb through her long auburn hair, wincing at the tangles but persevering until it lay smooth down her back. When she emerged from the cabin, she found Kenan tending a fire pit where coffee bubbled in a blackened pot. He looked up, his expression unreadable as he took in her transformed appearance. Better, she asked, suddenly self-conscious under his steady gaze. He cleared his throat. Yes, much. He gestured to a log beside the fire. Sit, coffee's ready and I've got some biscuits warming. Fiona lowered herself to the log, her muscles protesting but functioning. The morning air was crisp, the vast prairie stretching in all directions around the small homestead. A corral held 3 horses, the chestnut that had carried them both yesterday, a dappled gray and a sturdy black. A small garden patch grew to one side of the cabin, and beyond that, She could make out a modest herd of cattle grazing on distant grass. "Your place is lovely," she said, accepting the tin cup of coffee he offered. Kenan glanced around as if seeing it through her eyes. "It's not much. Just starting out, really. 2 years this autumn." "You've done all this yourself," he nodded, handing her a warm biscuit wrapped in a cloth. "Had help raising the cabin, neighbor about 5 miles east, but the rest, yes, it's impressive." And it was. Creating something from nothing in this wild land took courage and determination. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the crackling fire and distant lowing of cattle. Fiona felt her strength returning with each bite and sip. "How are you feeling?" Kenan finally asked. Strong enough to ride to town, reality intruded once more, her groom, her missed wedding, her uncertain future. "Yes, I believe so." He studied her face. "We can wait another day if needed." Was that hope she heard in his voice, or merely concern? "No, I should go." "Mr. Fletcher will be worried." Kenan's expression closed off. "Of course." He stood, brushing crumbs from his hands. "We'll leave within the hour. It's about 3 hours' ride." As he walked toward the corral, Fiona wondered at the sudden shift in his demeanor. Had she offended him somehow? But there was no time to dwell on it. She had obligations to fulfill, a future to secure. Even if something about the thought of meeting her intended now filled her with unexpected dread, the ride to Dodge City passed mostly in silence. Kenan had insisted she ride the gentle gray mare, while he took the chestnut. The motion of the horse beneath her was soothing, and the vast landscape provided much to contemplate. Occasionally, Kenan would point out landmarks or name plants and animals they passed. His knowledge of the land was extensive, and Fiona found herself impressed by his quiet expertise. When they stopped to rest the horses midway, he shared his canteen and jerky without ceremony. "Were you born out here?" she asked as they sat in the shade of a lone cottonwood tree. He shook his head. "Pennsylvania originally, came west after the war you fought. Union, wasn't much more than a boy, 16 when I lied to join up." His face took on a distant look. "Saw enough to know I didn't want to go back east when it was over." Fiona studied his profile, trying to imagine him as that young soldier. "My father fought as well. He didn't come home." Kenan's eyes met hers, understanding passing between them. "I'm sorry." "It was a long time ago." She handed back his canteen. "What brought you to Kansas specifically?" "Land." "Opportunity." He gestured to the rolling prairie. "Space to breathe. City walls close in on me now." Fiona smiled at that. "I've never known anything but city walls. St. Louis is all I've ever known." She looked out at the endless horizon. "This is overwhelming sometimes. You get used to it." He stood, offering a hand to help her up. "Or you don't." His calloused hand was warm around hers, and he held on perhaps a moment longer than necessary before releasing her to check the cinches on their saddles. As they rode on, Dodge City gradually appeared on the horizon, first as a smudge, then resolving into buildings and streets. Fiona felt anxiety building in her chest. What would Harris Fletcher think of his bride arriving days late, rescued by a rancher? Would he even want her now? Kenan seemed to sense her unease. "Fletcher's bank is on Front Street. We'll go there first." The town grew larger as they approached, and soon they were riding past the outskirts, shacks and small homesteads giving way to proper buildings. People stopped to stare at them as they rode down the main street, and Fiona realized what a sight they must make her in borrowed clothes, him dusty from the trail. The first bank of Dodge City was a 2-story brick building in the center of town. Kenan dismounted first, then helped Fiona down, his hands firm at her waist. "Thank you," she murmured, suddenly reluctant to leave his side. He nodded, his face impassive. "I'll wait out here, make sure you're settled." The implication was clear. He would ensure Fletcher accepted his responsibility toward her. The thought both comforted and strangely disappointed her. Taking a deep breath, Fiona climbed the steps and entered the bank. A bell jangled overhead, and several well-dressed men looked up from their work. One, a portly gentleman with a waxed mustache, approached with a frown. "May I help you, miss?" His tone suggested she'd wandered into the wrong establishment. "I'm looking for Mr. Harris Fletcher," she said, straightening her spine despite her nervousness. "I'm Fiona Nelson." Recognition dawned on the man's face, followed by something like relief. "Miss Nelson, we'd given up hope. Mr. Fletcher has been beside himself with worry." "There was trouble on the trail," she explained. "The stagecoach was robbed. I would have perished if not for the kindness of Mr. Northrup, who found me." The banker's eyes darted to the window where Kenan stood with the horses. "I see. Well, let me fetch Mr. Fletcher immediately. He's in his office." He disappeared through a door, leaving Fiona standing awkwardly in the lobby. Through the window, she could see Kenan's tall figure, his back to the bank as he surveyed the street. Something about his steady presence calmed her racing heart. The door opened again, and a slender man in an expensive suit emerged. Harris Fletcher was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with thinning hair and wire-rimmed spectacles. His expression was a mix of surprise and assessment as he approached. "Miss Nelson, I presume." His voice was higher than she'd imagined from his letters. "Mr. Fletcher," she curtsied slightly. "I apologize for my late arrival. There were complications on my journey." Fletcher's eyes swept over her borrowed dress, his lips pursing slightly. "So I see," Johnson explained about the robbery. "How fortunate that you were rescued." He glanced toward the window. "By Northrup, of all people." Something in his tone made Fiona bristle. "Yes, very fortunate. Mr. Northrup saved my life." Fletcher seemed to notice her change in demeanor and quickly softened his expression. Of course, and we're grateful, it's just that." He lowered his voice. "Northrup keeps to himself, bit of an odd one. He was nothing but kind to me," Fiona said firmly, naturally. Fletcher cleared his throat. "Well, the important thing is that you've arrived safely, if somewhat delayed. I've made arrangements for you to stay at Mrs. Hollister's boarding house until our wedding. I'm afraid with the delay, the minister has other commitments this week, but perhaps next Sunday would suffice." The businesslike way he discussed their marriage caught Fiona off guard. No questions about her ordeal, no offer to meet her rescuer, just practical arrangements. "That seems reasonable," she managed. "Though I have nothing. My belongings were all taken in the robbery. A regrettable situation." Fletcher frowned. "I'll have Mrs. Hollister provide some necessities and we can discuss a modest allowance for additional items." He checked his pocket watch. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an appointment. Johnson will show you to the boarding house. I'll call on you tomorrow evening for supper." With that, he nodded briskly and returned to his office, leaving Fiona standing in stunned silence. This cold reception was far from the warm welcome she'd imagined during those long months of correspondence. Johnson, the portly banker, approached with an apologetic smile. "Mr. Fletcher is a very busy man, miss. Don't take it personally. If you're ready, I can escort you to Mrs. Hollister's." "I need to thank Mr. Northrup first," Fiona said, moving toward the door before Johnson could object. Outside, Kenan turned as she approached, his eyes questioning. "It's arranged," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm to stay at a boarding house until the wedding on Sunday." He nodded, his expression giving nothing away. "Fletcher coming out, he had an appointment." She couldn't keep the disappointment from her voice. Kenan's jaw tightened. "I see, Mr. Northrup." Johnson had followed her out. "The bank extends its gratitude for your assistance to Miss Nelson. Most fortunate you were passing by." "Wasn't passing by," Kenan replied evenly. "Was tracking the Dalton gang. Found their handiwork instead." Johnson paled slightly. "Indeed. Well, Miss Nelson is safely delivered, and Mr. Fletcher will ensure she's properly cared for now." Kenan's eyes met Fiona's, and something passed between them, a question, perhaps, or a warning. "You'll be all right, then?" "Yes," she said, though uncertainty gnawed at her. "Thanks to you." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Your wedding dress, what's left of it. Thought you might want to keep it." Fiona accepted the bundle, touched that he'd thought to bring it. "Thank you, for everything." Kenan hesitated, then reached out and briefly touched her hand. "Good luck, Miss Nelson." Before she could respond, he mounted his horse and with a final nod rode away. Fiona watched until he disappeared down the street, a strange emptiness settling in her chest. "Mrs. Hollister's is this way, Miss Nelson," Johnson prompted, gesturing toward a side street. With one last glance in the direction Kenan had gone, Fiona followed, clutching the remains of her wedding dress and wondering why the prospect of her approaching marriage now filled her with such dread. The 3 days that followed were a blur of preparations. Mrs. Hollister, a widow with a sharp eye and sharper tongue, provided a room and basic necessities. Fletcher sent a dressmaker to fit Fiona for a new wedding dress and 2 everyday gowns, though he made it clear these were practical investments rather than gifts. Their supper together had been stilted, conversation limited to his business interests and expectations for their married life, which seemed to consist mainly of her running his household and appearing at social functions. When Fiona mentioned her interest in books and perhaps continuing her education, Fletcher had laughed indulgently, patting her hand as if she were a child with fanciful ideas. Now, sitting at her window in Mrs. Hollister's boarding house watching rain streak the glass, Fiona felt trapped. Tomorrow was her wedding day, yet all she could think about was the quiet cabin on the prairie and the man who had carried her to safety without a word. A knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. Mrs. Hollister entered, a concerned frown creasing her weathered face. "You've a visitor, Miss Nelson, most irregular at this hour, but he insists it's important." Fiona's heart leapt. "Who is it?" "That rancher, Northrup, says he needs to speak with you directly. Kenan." "Here." Fiona rose quickly, smoothing her borrowed dress. "I'll come down." Mrs. Hollister's disapproving look spoke volumes, but she merely nodded. "5 minutes. Then I'll have to insist he leave. Your reputation to consider, especially the day before your wedding." Fiona hurried down the narrow stairs to find Kenan standing just inside the front door, hat in hand, rainwater dripping from his duster. His hair was damp, his expression serious. "Mr. Northrup," she said, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. "Miss Nelson." He glanced at Mrs. Hollister hovering nearby. "Might we speak privately? It's important," the landlady huffed. "The parlor door stays open." Once in the small parlor, Kenan spoke in low tones. "I've been tracking the Dalton gang since I found you, caught up with them yesterday at their camp." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. "Recovered this, thought it might be yours." Fiona's hands trembled as she opened the pouch. Inside was her mother's locket, the one possession she'd been devastated to lose in the robbery. "How did you know you mentioned it?" "While you were recovering, talked in your sleep some." A hint of color touched his cheeks. "Said it was your mother's, only thing you had of hers." Tears welled in Fiona's eyes as she clutched the locket. "I can't believe you did this. You could have been killed." Wasn't alone. Marshall and some deputies came along. He shifted uncomfortably under her grateful gaze. "Wasn't just for the locket, those men needed stopping." "Still," she whispered, "thank you." Kenan nodded, then seemed to struggle with what to say next. "Heard in town your wedding's tomorrow?" "Yes." The word felt heavy on her tongue. "Fletcher's a fortunate man." Fiona looked down at the locket in her palm. "Is he? I'm beginning to wonder if either of us is fortunate in this arrangement." A moment of silence stretched between them. Then Kenan said quietly, "You don't have to go through with it, you know." Her head snapped up. "What? Marriage, if it's not what you want?" His gray eyes held her steadily. "Even out here, women have choices." "Do they?" Fiona laughed without humor. "I have no money, no family, no skills beyond basic schooling. What choice do I have but to honor my commitment?" "Could teach," Kenan suggested. "Town's growing, needs a schoolteacher, or work at the general store. Mrs. Miller's looking for help." He paused. "Or there's ranching." The implication hung in the air between them. "Ranching," she repeated softly. "It's hard work," he continued, his voice gaining confidence. "Long days, rough conditions, but there's freedom in it, space to breathe." He echoed his words from their journey to town. "Could show you if you wanted." Fiona's heart pounded in her chest. "Are you offering me a job, Mr. Northrup?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Among other things, maybe." Before she could respond, Mrs. Hollister appeared in the doorway. Time's up, I'm afraid. Mr. Northrup, you'll have to leave now. Kenan nodded, placing his hat back on his head, just returning something that belongs to Miss Nelson. He moved toward the door, then turned back. Think about what I said about choices. After he left, Fiona stood in the parlor clutching her locket, her mind whirling with possibilities she hadn't dared consider before. That night, sleep eluded her. She lay awake, comparing the man who had carried her to safety without a word to the one who discussed their marriage as if arranging a business transaction. One had risked his life to recover a memento precious to her. The other had barely asked about her harrowing experience. By dawn, Fiona had made her decision. She rose early, packed her few belongings, and wrote 2 letters. One to Mrs. Hollister, thanking her for her hospitality and including payment from the small allowance Fletcher had provided. The second to Fletcher himself, apologizing for the pain her decision might cause but explaining that she could not enter a marriage without love or true companionship. The morning streets were quiet as Fiona made her way to the livery stable. The owner raised his eyebrows at her request to rent a horse, but asked no questions when she paid in advance. The ride out of town felt like freedom, each hoofbeat taking her farther from a future that wasn't hers to claim and closer to one she was choosing for herself. The rain had cleared, leaving the prairie washed clean, wildflowers nodding in the morning breeze. She knew the way, having memorized landmarks during their journey into town. 3 hours passed quickly, anticipation building with each mile. When the small cabin appeared on the horizon, Fiona's heart soared. As she approached, Kenan emerged from the corral, freezing when he recognized her. She reined her horse to a stop a few yards away, suddenly uncertain. "Miss Nelson," he said, removing his hat, "didn't expect to see you today." "I believe," she said, gathering her courage, "that I was offered a position. Something in ranching." A slow smile spread across his face, the first full smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his features, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Was offered more than that, if I recall." Fiona dismounted, her legs somewhat unsteady after the long ride. "I've never been particularly good at making biscuits," she warned, taking a step toward him. "And I know nothing about cattle. Biscuits can be learned," he replied, closing the distance between them. "Cattle, too. And I have a stubborn streak a mile wide, according to my father." Kenan's smile deepened. "Notice that already." He reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "What about Fletcher?" "I left him a letter." She looked up into those storm-gray eyes. "I couldn't marry a man I didn't love, not when." "Not when," he prompted softly. "Not when I think I could love someone else. Given time," Kenan's hand cupped her cheek. "Time we have plenty of, if you're sure this is what you want." "I've never been more sure of anything," Fiona whispered. When his lips met hers, gentle and questioning, Fiona knew she'd made the right choice. This wasn't the life she'd planned when she boarded that stagecoach, but it was the one her heart had chosen with the man who had carried her home without a word, but whose actions had spoken volumes. 3 years later, Fiona stood on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching as Kenan taught their 1-year-old daughter to toddle across the yard. The ranch had prospered under their joint efforts, her education proving valuable for record-keeping and correspondence, his knowledge of the land ensuring their cattle thrived. Harris Fletcher had eventually married the milliner's daughter, and Fiona occasionally saw them in town, exchanging polite nods. She never regretted her decision, especially in moments like this, her husband's laughter mingling with their daughter's delighted squeals as the setting sun painted the prairie gold. "Catherine's getting faster," she called, one hand resting on her swelling belly where their second child grew. Kenan scooped up their daughter, crossing to the porch with long strides. "Takes after her mama, stubborn and determined." "I prefer to call it knowing my own mind," Fiona countered with a smile. "Whatever you call it," he said, leaning down to kiss her, "it led you back here. That's all that matters." As the first stars appeared in the vast Kansas sky, Fiona Nelson Northrup stood surrounded by the family she'd found in the most unexpected way, brought together by desperation and kindness. And bound now by a love that had begun the moment, a starving bride collapsed on the trail, and a cowboy carried her home without a word.